Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things with Chris James, broadcasting from the auxiliary radio station for Arkanasa Radio in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show once more. Tonight we're going to be talking about ghosts of the Blue Ghost. Bill Lahr sent me a link to a video of the Blue Ghost. I've been to the ship, as well as the Midway in San Diego. I've visited Seawolf Park several times, the Elisa in Galveston, and the Battleship Texas. I like visiting ships as long as they're tied up to the pier. I'm not an ocean-going kind of person. I have a few reasons. One is there are things living under the waves we can't see until they rise up to eat some unsuspecting sailor. I do not want to be somebody's meal. World War II, a cargo ship was torpedoed and sank. The rest of the convoy kept going, which was the policy back then. One officer and 6 crewmen were able to climb aboard a life raft where they were to spend the next few days. On the second morning, the men discovered there were now only 6 of them. They speculated one of their fellow survivors had fallen over during the night. They set up a watch to keep an eye on each other. The next morning, the man last on watch was missing. They figured he must have fallen asleep and fell over the side. That following night, the men were all brought out of their slumber by screams. A huge tentacle had grabbed the lieutenant, and he was desperately clutching at the raft as the creature drug him towards the edge. The crew grabbed their knives and attacked the tentacle. It finally let go and slipped below the waves. When the men were finally rescued, the lieutenant had huge sucker marks on his thigh. The authorities declared this was just a result of having been torpedoed from his ship, and no such creature could possibly exist. A giant squid were later found washed up on shore. Nope, not for me. I've been out in Galveston Bay, and that was way too much adventure. There are also reports of the megalodon still roaming the oceans looking for a snack. Sure, scientists say this gigundous shark is extinct, just like they said the coelacanth was extinct up until they caught one in a net. The unidentified submerged objects, or USOs, that have been seen by men and women at sea haven't abducted anyone that we know of. I'm waiting for the reports of people being taken from their ships and boats and being poked and prodded by underwater aliens. They're going to start coming out pretty soon, I'll bet. I think it has happened already, and it's just a short time before the stories begin coming out. That new naval reporting system, well, we're not going to get much out of that, but eventually somebody's going to talk. There just might be all manner of creature living in the oceans that don't know they aren't supposed to exist. Just because a guy in a white lab coat haven't seen doesn't make it not real. We know more about the planet Mars than we do about the bottom of the ocean. More people have walked on the moon than have visited the deepest parts of the ocean. 12 men have walked on the moon. Only 6 have been to the very bottom of the ocean. What's down there? I really don't want to wait for the government of any country to come out and tell us what's down there. We'll all be dead and gone long before they tell us what they found. Conceived in 1920s and the early 30s, the U.S. Navy's Lexington and Yorktown class aircraft carriers were designed to conform to the limitations set forth by the Washington Naval Treaty. This agreement placed restrictions on the tonnage of different types of warships, as well as capping each signatory's overall tonnage. These types of restrictions were affirmed through the 1930 London Naval Treaty. This sounds like a bunch of politicians were working overtime to sound good to foreign governments. At the end of World War I, the Allies were all trying to outdo each other in pretending the World War could never happen again. They placed self-limitations on their own abilities to fight. This is right up there with taking away law-abiding citizens' rights to own firearms to punish criminals. It wasn't enough to say the Germans couldn't have any warships. The signers went as far as to say the Allies would only have so many ships and they could only be so big. During World War I, Japan and Italy had been on the side of the Allies. They fought against the Austrians and Germans. In the 1930s, as Japan began building bigger and bigger ships, nobody was much concerned. They still side with us if a war ever came around, which most thought would never happen. A treaty is a piece of paper with only the power of anyone willing to abide by it. Hitler signed a treaty with Russia just before he invaded. The steel Japan used to build its mighty warships came mostly from the United States, as well as most of their oil. As global tensions increased, Japan and Italy departed the treaty structure in 1936. With the collapse of the system, the U.S. Navy began designing a new, larger class of aircraft carrier, and one which drew from the lessons learned from the Yorktown class. The resulting design was wider and longer, as well as it included a deck edge elevator. This had been employed earlier in the USS Wasp. During World War I, aircraft carriers had elevators in the middle of the deck to bring aircraft up from below. This pretty much shut down the runway while the lift was moving up or down. The center of the runway was gone, so no planes could take off or land while aircraft were being raised or lowered. In 1940, the Navy sought to squeeze a large aircraft into the ship with nearly 25% less displacement than the Yorktown class. To save weight and space, the Wasp was constructed with a low-power propulsion system. Talk about shooting yourself in the foot. Our Navy was okay with building a ship that was not battle-ready. Wasp was launched with almost no armor, modest speed, and more significantly, no protection from torpedoes. Absence of side protection of the boilers and internal aviation fuel stores doomed her to a blazing end. These were inherent design flaws that were recognized during construction, but could not be remedied within the allowed tonnage. These flaws, combined with relative lack of damage control experience in the early days of the war, proved fatal. This is about as smart as a boxer preparing for a major bout by sitting on the couch drinking beer and eating junk food, while his opponent exercises and eats right. Too many people believed it could never happen again because they had just fought the war to end all wars, as they like to say. The only good thing coming out of the USS Wasp was that side elevator. The Lexington started out being called the USS Cabot, named for John Cabot from Italy. also known as Giovanni Caboto, who was an Italian navigator and explorer. His 1497 voyage to the coast of North America under the commission of Henry VII of England is the earliest known European exploration of coastal North America since the Norse visited to Vinland in the 11th century. The name doesn't sound very impressive. The Navy wanted to replace a ship that had just gone down. USS Lexington CV-2, nicknamed Lady Lex, was an early aircraft carrier built for the United States Navy. As she was the lead ship of the Lexington class, her only sister ship, the Saratoga, was commissioned a month earlier. Originally designed as a battle cruiser, she was converted to one of the Navy's first aircraft carriers during construction to comply with the terms of the Washington Naval Treaty of 1922, which essentially terminated all new battleships or battlecruiser construction. The ship entered service in 1928 and was assigned to the Pacific Fleet for her entire career. In May 1942, at the Battle of Coral Sea, the USS Lexington, the Lady Lex, was hit by 2 torpedoes dropped from Japanese torpedo planes. As the ship's crew were in the process of making repairs, a faulty generator threw sparks into gas vapor cloud. The explosion damaged the ship, but it continued with flight operations. A few hours later, there was a second explosion. This time, the water pumps were put out of commission, making firefighting impossible, and they could no longer bail out the seawater that was rushing in. The ship was no longer able to move, and the fire below deck were being fueled by the avgas stored for the aircraft. The crew were ordered to abandon ship. Once everybody was safely on board other ships, the destroyer Phelps was told to sink the aircraft carrier so it would not fall into enemy hands. The Lady Lex was sunk at about 7 p.m. The Navy quickly recommissioned the Cabot as the New Lexington, CV-16. After a ship is named and christened, changing the name of a ship is considered bad luck. This may be because sailors believe their boats take on a mind of their own once they were named. Another explanation is that renaming a ship meant you were trying to trick the gods of the seas. The Lexington hadn't been christened yet, so it escaped that run of bad luck. With the war on and the Lady Lex sitting at the bottom of the sea, the New Lexington was sent to replace its predecessor without being painted with camouflage. A dazzle camouflage was used extensively in World War I and to a lesser extent in World War II. Credited to the British marine artist Norman Wilkinson, it consisted of a complex pattern of geometric shapes in contrasting colors, interrupting and intersecting with each other. It made it very difficult for the enemy to be able to tell which direction the ship was sailing and how big it was. This interfered with submarines' ability to fire torpedoes, since there was a lot of math involved. The Lexington was still blue when it reported for duty. The aircraft carrier was essential in supporting several attacks on Japanese-held islands. The airplanes did a lot of damage to both Japanese shipping and their navy. Late in December, the New Lexington was hit by torpedo bombers. The attack was in the dark, making it hard for the defenders to do their job. Once Damage Control did their investigation, they found the steering controls were out of whack. The crew had to rig a temporary rudder, and they set sail for Pearl Harbor. The Japanese Navy believed they had managed to sink the new aircraft carrier, and they sent out the word. Tokyo Rose made the announcement over the airwaves that the giant blue ship had gone down after a successful attack. Tokyo Rose was not one person. The name was used by about 20 women who were making English language radio broadcasts during World War II, aimed at demoralizing American soldiers and sailors in the Pacific. They would say things like while sailors were serving in the Pacific, their wives and girlfriends were running around on them. They would talk about how lonely the men were sitting in ships far from home. The radio broadcasters all kind of sounded the same, so most people thought it was just one woman. During the years of talking on the radio, the name Tokyo Rose was never used. No one ever called themselves by the name, yet it became famous and infamous throughout the entire Pacific War area. A lot of things Tokyo Rose was credited with saying, she never did. As sailors and Marines would begin talking about some nasty idea, and when asked why they said the things they did, they would say they heard Tokyo Rose say it. Once the war was over, the radio transcripts were gone over, and there was no record of many of the so-called radio broadcasts that the men swore they had heard. Iva Ikuko Taguri was born in Los Angeles, California, July 4th, 1916. Yes, she was born on the 4th of July. Her parents, Jun and Fumi Taguri, were both Japanese immigrants, but her father wanted their family to assimilate into American culture. So growing up, Taguri was discouraged from learning Japanese. Her father also insisted that she use a knife and fork rather than chopsticks. In the middle of 1941, Taguri was sent by her parents to be the family's representative for the upcoming death of her maternal aunt. Although she was too pressed for time to apply for a passport or a visa, she was giving a certificate by the U.S. State Department which gave her permission to travel and return, and was told that that would be good enough. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, Taguri found herself trapped in a country where she didn't hardly speak the language. In order to earn money to live on, Taguri took a job as a typist at Radio Tokyo. The British POW, Major Charles Hughes Cousins, who was in charge of making English broadcasts, said Taguri was instrumental in smuggling food and medicine to the prisoners of war. The radio crew was known as the 0 Hour Crew, which was made up by POWs and civilians taken into custody by the Japanese military. To reach a large geographical area, these transmissions included regular and shortwave radio broadcasts. The program featured Allied prisoners reading current news and playing recorded music and sending messages from POWs to their families back home and to Allied sailors and soldiers serving in the Pacific Theater. These messages were interlaced with demoralizing commentary, and they appealed to surrender or sabotage the Allied war effort. The Major was actually trying to use idiomatic words to throw a wrench into the propaganda. Many men listening to the radio found the messages soothing instead of disheartening. It's not so much what was said, but how it was said. If you found yourself starving in an enemy prison, and they said you could get food if you were willing to talk on the radio, would you? Sitting at home with food and water, it's hard to say what we might do in such a situation. When a new voice was needed for the radio broadcast, Cousins suggested Taguri take the job. Everything was written and said in English, so she began talking over the airwaves. When the Lexington was torpedoed, Toguri announced over the radio the ship had been sunk. A few months later, a scout plane spotted the Lexington, and word got around that the blue ship was still afloat. Then the Lexington was attacked once more, and word spread that it had been sunk again. Once more, the blue aircraft carrier was seen, still afloat. Soon, the Lexington became known as the Blue Ghost because Toguri had called it that. Over the course of the war, the Lexington was sunk 4 times. Well, at least that's what the Japanese radio said. The USS Lexington was decommissioned on April 23, 1947, and placed in the National Defense Reserve Fleet at Puget Sound. As for Toguri, at the end of the war, some people, mostly people who fought the war from behind a desk, wanted blood. She was arrested and charged with treason. Of the 20 people who broadcast Japanese propaganda, not to mention the dozens who worked in the office, she was the only one held accountable. The name Tokyo Rose was attached to Toguri alone. She was given a 10-year sentence, of which she served 7 years. Once she was paroled, her citizenship was revoked and deportation proceedings were started. Somehow she managed to stay in the U.S. President Gerald Ford pardoned Toguri on January 19, 1977, 20 years after her release from prison, making her the only person convicted of treason in this country that was pardoned. The Lexington was redesignated as an attack carrier on October 1, 1952, and it was moved to the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard the following September. There it received some modernization. These included updates to Lexington's island, that's that big thing that sits on the side of the flight deck, the creation of a hurricane bow, installation of an angled flight deck, as well as strengthening of the flight deck to handle new jet aircraft. My dog, M, decided that would be a good time to start barking at Lord knows what outside the door, so I had to take a little pause. A guy I met was assigned to the Lexington as an electrician, a Seaman Floyd. When he was nearly killed when somebody turned the power back on while he was working on a power line, Floyd decided he didn't much like electricity, so he switched over to being a corpsman. He said that his berth was right under the deck where the jets would land. Every time a jet hit the deck, paint would flick off the ceiling and fall on his bunk. August 15, 1955, the Lexington had begun operations out of San Diego. The following year, it was commenced a deployment with the U.S. 7th Fleet in the far east of Yokosuka as its home port. Arriving back in San Diego, October 1957, Lexington was moved through a brief overhaul once more back at Puget Sound. July 58, it returned to the Far East to reinforce the 7th Fleet during the Second Taiwan Strait Crisis. The Second Taiwan Strait Crisis was a conflict that took place between the Communist China, also known as the People's Republic of China, and a few Taiwan islands. At the time, Taiwan was known as the Republic of China. In this conflict, the PRC shelled the island of Kinmen and Matsu along the east coast of mainland China. The communists claimed this was in order to liberate Taiwan from the Chinese Nationalist Party. I believe the main reason was to probe the extent of the U.S. Defense of Taiwan territory. The Lexington was there, but never had to use any of its defensive or offensive capabilities. After 4 years of service off the coast of Asia, in 1962, Lexington received orders to relieve the USS Antietam as a training carrier in the Gulf of Mexico. October 1st, the carrier was redesignated as an anti-submarine warfare carrier. However, this was delayed until late in the month due to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Taking over the training role December 29th, Lexington began routine operations out of Pensacola, Florida. Pilots would land and take off over and over so they could learn how to not crash their planes. This also gave the flight crew practice dodging incoming planes and how to avoid being sucked into the engines of jets. Yes, I know there's more to it than that, but I was in the Army, so I can't not make fun of guys in the Navy. For the next 20 years, the Lexington was used for training. August 18, 1980, Lexington became the first aircraft carrier in the United States Navy history to have women stationed on board as crew members. October 29, 1989, a pilot making his first ever touch-and-go attempt aboard the Lexington crashed into the flight deck, killing 5 and injuring 19 crew members. One of those killed was Airman Lisa Mayo, a 25-year-old sailor from Oklahoma City. Yes, she was called an airman. The Lexington was decommissioned November 8, 1991. The following year, the carrier was denoted for use as a museum ship and is currently open to the public in Corpus Christi, Texas. I've been there, but it was a long time ago. We did the whole tour and it was impressive, but man, that is a lot of walking. Not only is the Blue Ghost a museum, it is also a memorial to the men and women who died in either combat or accidents. When the ship was hit by a torpedo, a few men, I couldn't track down the exact number, were killed by the explosion. November 5th, 1944, the Lexington suffered a Japanese kamikaze attack. The Japanese plane hit the engine room to the back of the bridge area. 50 seamen were killed. Some were killed in the initial crash, while others died from the ensuing fire. The Japanese pilot was also killed by his own hands. Keep in mind, to him, he was doing what the Emperor wanted. This wasn't suicide, more like extreme personal action. Japanese planes would strafe the deck when possible. 50 caliber bullets raining down from above will do a lot of damage. In the confusion of an attack, there is no place that is safe. Munitions on the deck being used for defense can become deadly to the men using them. If a bunch of 50 caliber bullets wind up inside the area where the anti-aircraft guns have their ammo stored, something bad can happen. Now, what will cause some spirits to stay in a location while others move on is anyone's guess. Some will say if people die violently, they will stay on not knowing it's time to move on. If this were true, how do you explain the lack of hauntings in the area where trench warfare took place during World War I? Ghost investigators visiting places like the Somme or the Ypres, among other battle sites, were expecting mass activity. They found very little ghost or spirit evidence. During World War II, the Lexington was in 21 of the 24 Navy battles. 370 men and 1 woman died aboard the Lexington CV-16. Not all were war casualties. Some deaths were caused by accident or illness. A chief petty officer on the hangar deck of the USS Lexington took a step backwards. He inadvertently stepped into a rotating propeller of a plane that was being worked on. There was so much noise on the hangar deck, he didn't notice how close he was to the spinning blades until it was too late. And on that unhappy note, I'm going to take a very brief pause, drink some coffee, and play a couple of commercials, so don't go away. We'll be right back after this. Did you stay up all night watching horror movies and now you think your house might be haunted? Contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society and have them come by and check out your house. Maybe you accidentally invited a ghost or a spirit, or maybe it's just the plumbing. You can contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. I had no idea what I was missing until I had my eyes checked at the Optica del Norte 107 Calle del Norte. Now I can see all kinds of things I'd been missing my entire life. You should get your eyes checked too. Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the Organic Man Coffee Trike.shop. Isn't it about time you did something for your skin besides mistreat it? Contact Lourdes James at 956-723-3019 and take care of your skin with a free skincare class. This is Arkanasa Radio you've been listening to. And welcome back to the show. Before I get going on the Blue Ghost, why spend all your money at these ginormous book places that have more money than the United States government itself? Next time you're looking for a particular book, try some of the smaller businesses first. Might I suggest checking out the Phoenix Bookstore here in Laredo on Victoria Street. If you're not in Laredo, you can always find them at bookshop.org/shop/the Phoenix Bookstore. They have a wide selection and they are online if you're looking for a book. Many people with psychic ability have felt sick in certain areas of the USS Lexington, like the switching room. This could be explained as electromagnetic effects, or it could be they are connecting with someone who died there. Massive electromagnetic fields can cause all manner of physical ailments. Headaches, nausea, dizziness. Some folks are very sensitive to these waves and can become bedridden if exposed for a long time. Also, since spirits and ghosts can't consume food in order to make energy, they have to go where the energy is. This is why flashlights and camera batteries tend to go dead so quick during a ghost investigation. Maybe a lot of these spirits are drawn to the switch room since that's where the power is. Not all hauntings are scary or unnerving. A crew were in the process of painting a section of the ship. They took a break for lunch, and when they returned, the paint project had been finished by unseen hands. Chipping and applying paint is an ongoing job on any ship. Sailors spend most of their time with either a scraper or a brush in one hand. The paint crew could not find any explanation as to who had finished painting that section of the ship for them. They could only conclude it had to have been former members of the crew. The deputy director of the museum has had an ongoing encounter. While leaving his office, he hears the sound of somebody standing up and walking along behind him. If he turns to look, there's nobody there. No one knows for sure who the kamikaze pilot was that hit the Lexington. Hundreds of pilots flew on these one-way missions. So many never reached their targets, and those who did, there was never anything left to identify them. The Japanese pilot who hit the flight deck of the Lexington has been seen by visitors. People report seeing two men standing side by side. One looks like a U.S. pilot, while the other is dressed as a Japanese pilot. The witnesses believe the kamikaze pilot who killed 50 U.S. sailors is now a ghost on board the ship. Sailors and soldiers might hate each other during the height of battle, but when the killing is over, they become closer to each other than those that stayed at home. Visitors touring the engine room reported seeing a man dressed in old-style sailor uniform moving about the machinery. He was described as having short blonde hair and striking blue eyes. At some point in time, the ghost became known as Charlie. The witnesses said Charlie actually talked to them, telling them about the machinery in engine room number 2. Many visitors went away thinking this was one of the staff working at the museum, dressed up to look like a World War II sailor. It was only once they discovered there were no staff working in the engines they realized they were seeing somebody from the past, something paranormal. Had Charlie been seen by one or two people, you could say they were just mistaken, but Charlie has been reported by somewhere around 200 witnesses. The folks running the museum brought in some high-speed projection equipment to put a hologram of a sailor in the room as a teaching tool. They dubbed the new sailor Charlie. If you see a sailor in the engine room, well away from the projector, this might be the ghost. He looks real. He doesn't look hazy. You can't see through him. He looks solid like you and me. If you see what looks like a ghost, it is probably just the hologram. Be sure and look close to figure out which one you're looking at. Oh, take a picture, regardless of which it is. Charlie knows things about the engines even the staff is unaware of. He talks as if he worked on them for years. He may be just one of thousands of U.S. sailors who were assigned to the ship in its 50 years of service. Many Navy personnel talk about the ship they were on like it was home, which it actually was for a short time in their lives. When people pass on to the next thing that comes after the here and now, some may go looking for the time and place they were the happiest. Maybe that is their idea of heaven. Then again, not all ghosts look as if they're happy. Maybe it's the most significant time in their lives that puts their spirit in a particular place. A couple reported seeing a man in Navy work uniform jump from one of the upper railings. They ran to see if the man was injured, but he had vanished. It had been high enough any living person would have broken at least a leg, if not both. This sailor was dark-haired, so it wasn't Charlie. One woman said she saw a man on the bridge. The sailor was covered in scars, and it ran at her when she saw it. The being had no eyes. It scared her so much that she ran to the office and reported her encounter to the staff. They had no answers, only more questions. What could this have been? A spirit? Maybe the ghost of some sailor who was seriously wounded during one of the battles? Having been so badly injured, he might be running from his pain, and it only looked like he was attacking. Then again, it could be some evil entity that was drawn to the Lexington for unknown reasons, and now it lurks in out-of-the-way places waiting for some unsuspecting victim to scare. The chief petty officer who backed into that running prop is seen standing in the spot where he died. People report seeing a scowling man looking at them. Some think the chief is mad at himself for dying in such a manner. The museum staff placed a mannequin dressed in a chief uniform in the spot where the petty officer had died. Now people report seeing the ghost standing next to the mannequin. Some spirits are what is known as residual ghosts. They go through the same actions over and over, never acknowledging those around them. Men dressed in sailor uniforms have been seen walking along a corridor and stepping right through a bulkhead. Research has shown at one time there had been a passageway in that spot. With the many refittings over the years, some openings were closed off while others were put in different locations. The ghosts don't know the wall is there now. Residual hauntings are like recordings of past movements. The folks I know who were in the Navy talk about their time on board ship as if those were the best times of their lives. Many stay in contact with their shipmates or their ships by the way of the internet. Many Navy ships have their own Facebook pages. The folks working security on the ship have heard what sounds like men running back and forth on the hangar deck. They search the entire area only to find there is no one there. The security folks also have seen shadows moving about the ship. Some will say that a shadow being is a spirit that doesn't have the energy to manifest themselves as a full ghost, so they show up only as a shadow. Others say shadow beings are evil entities that are here for nasty purposes. They could be the residual energy left behind during battle that comes together in the shape that looks human. The shadow being Ishmael caught in the basement of Old Mercy did kind of choke him, but we don't know why. At night, during lightning storms, men have been seen running around the flight deck. The energy being splashed about the deck from the sky just might be enough to give them spirits still lingering on the ship but too weak to be seen. The flashes of lightning look a bit like flashes of explosions during an attack. Some ghosts act as if they can see the people walking around them. The chief who scowls at anyone looking at him is known to be looking back at the person he sees. The spirits that finish the paint job for the workers. Charlie actually talks to people who saw him. People have reported smelling food cooking in the galley section. This was long after any kitchen staff worked on the ship. While walking along deserted passageways, the sounds of others walking along have been heard by witnesses who say there was nobody else around. In 2007, the folks from TAPS visited the Lexington. Ghost Hunters had an episode where the gang investigated the aircraft carrier. Season 3, Episode 11. They ran cables throughout the ship and then they did two-man investigations. The night didn't reveal much. None of their cameras caught anything. They did manage to catch 2 recorded voices. One was hard to understand. It was just a garbled message. The other sounded like a woman's voice. This they attributed to Lisa Mayo, who died when the training flight crashed. As she had been one of the deck crew only a few months after graduating from Navy basic training. Parts of the movie Pearl Harbor were filmed on the USS Lexington Museum in 2001. The Blue Ghost played 2 roles in the movie. It was a Japanese ship and it was the USS Hornet. The Lexington is permanently docked at 2914 North Shoreline Boulevard in Corpus Christi, Texas. Just take I-37 east until you can't go any further. Well, unless you want to go for a swim. Take Highway 35 north and cross the Harbor Bridge and look for the next exit. You're going to have to drive back south along the tourist shops and you'll see the huge blue ship. That's what you're looking for. There are lots of motels and restaurants all around it. If you're like me and you don't much care for staying in hotels, there's an RV park at the far north end of the island. If you're there to see the museum, enjoy the visit. Take lots of photos. If you're there looking for a possible ghost encounter, here are a few suggestions. While taking photos on board the Lexington, take a few extra measures to be sure you are catching actual paranormal images instead of just accidents. Some of the displays are behind glass. Don't use the flash or you'll get what looks like a cloud or a mist in the photo. If you don't have a flash and you see something, you just might have caught a spirit. Be sure that ghost pictures isn't just your reflection from a piece of glass. Take at least 2 photos each time. If you see a glow or a bright light in an image, it could be just the reflection from something shiny. If the glow is only in one of 2 or more images, you might have caught a spirit in one photo. Look for anybody dressed as if they're from another time. Be sure you're not looking at a role player or a hologram of Charlie. Take as many photos as you can. Examine the images on a computer. Look for any indication the person you're looking at is among the living. Look over each and every photo, even if you don't see anything abnormal. You just might be missing something ethereal. Here is my favorite peeve. It drives me nuts when somebody makes a video by walking through a structure or a location, swinging the camera right and left as if they're looking for terrorists with an M4. Move slow so the autofocus has a chance to zoom in on everything in front of it. To pan from one side of the room to the other should take about 10 seconds. I know that's an awful slow, but when you try to view the video later, you'll see everything instead of just a blur. Some folks move around so much it's like watching Planet Terror. Just when it looks like they're safe, the movie jumps to a total mess. Really, an M16 is a prosthetic leg? It's a good idea to have a photo processing file. Something you can enlarge the images and change the exposure. By brightening an image, you can see things otherwise missed in dark corners. Just be sure to not mess up the original images. I make copies of images I want to lighten or darken for viewing. The copy can be cropped, lightened, flipped, all kinds of things as long as the original stays intact. Once you've found a shocking thing hidden in a dark corner, you can save the manipulated image with the original by just adding an A or a 2 to the name of the file. This way, if you do find something hidden in a photograph, you won't be accused of digitally manipulating the image in order to con folks. Having a quality image file also gives you the ability to sort images into different files so you can find what you're looking for. Don't use the date as a name. You might not remember the right date. Name the file according to the location or the images on it. You should remember where you were when you snapped that photo of the huge black killer shadow. If you're serious about your investigation, bring a notebook and a pen. Record where you were while taking each batch of photos. Once you're back home and looking over your evidence, you might not be able to tell where you were on board the ship when you took certain photos. To me, most parts of a ship look the same. If you see a placard mounted on the wall, get a quick photo of it. The information might tell you what part of the ship you were in or any kind of historical possibly connected to your sighting. If you do see something in one of your images, feel free to share it. There are ghost and paranormal sites that would love to see what you've managed to catch. Just don't feel bad if some so-and-so comes out saying your picture of a ghost is some uninteresting object and you are mistaken. Some folks will deny ghosts exist even after seeing one. There are some ghost enthusiasts who like to pile derision onto their fellow investigators. If they didn't catch the image, it must be fake. That's the world we live in. I've had folks question some of my podcasts. I've had people say the stories in my books are not true. I look at it as just a part of life. Like Winston Churchill said, "You have enemies. Good. You've stood up for something you believe in." You'll also run into the problem of people that will say, that ship can't possibly be haunted because the TAPS people didn't catch hardly anything. Ghosts do not perform on demand. You cannot go into a haunted location and guarantee that any kind of a spirit is going to pop up and make its presence known. Maybe they're on vacation. Maybe the energy level is so low that they just can't do anything, or maybe they just don't feel like it. We don't know why ghosts and spirits show up in some locations and not in others. Just go with the fact that some places retain spirits and others don't. Why are there ghosts reported in the Lexington? It could be the spirits of those men and that one woman who died while serving their country in both times of war and peace don't realize that they're dead. Or maybe they want to stay to finish some unknown project hanging over their heads. There are also things known as transient spirits. They move from place to place driven by unknown forces. That female voice that the TAPS folks caught could be Lisa Mayo, or it could be just some other spirit that decided to move to the Lexington. The way I see it, we don't know why ghosts do the things they do. Some are like a recording showing us over and over some mundane activity from the past. A spirit walking along a hallway going from one place to another. Poltergeists that let us know they're there by making noises, moaning or groaning. Maybe saying something we just can't catch. EVPs are recordings that need to be interpreted. Then we have the ghosts that interact with their witnesses. They see us about the same time we see them. Charlie has been heard speaking, talking about the machinery in the engine room number 2. In many cultures, seeing a ghost is considered normal. In Japan, if you see a ghost, you're expected to show it respect. In August, from the 13th to the 15th, families have traditions to honor the dead family members. Lanterns are lit in graveyards to help show the spirits it's time for a visit. More lanterns are placed outside of homes to welcome their ancestors. They put out food and drink so the ghosts have nourishment. There are dances for the dead for their entertainment. Here in the U.S., some will laugh at you if you say you've seen a ghost. They'll ridicule people who see spirits even if they know that their grandmother or grandfather say that they saw the ghost of a family member. I try to ask just about everybody I meet if they've ever seen a ghost or a UFO. This is my way of getting stories for my books. A lot of people say they never have seen anything paranormal. The funny thing is, after saying this, some will proceed to tell me about their sightings. I've had people who overheard my questions come forward to tell me about something they've seen or a story told to them by a relative. If you enjoyed tonight's show, tell your friends. Let them know what they're missing. If you have a story, something you believe to be real, something not seen in print, let me know and I'll put it in my next book. I'm waiting on a few really good stories from people I talked to in Edinburgh. I didn't have my recorder there and I couldn't find my notebook. A bad planning since I knew I'd be talking to people. Let me know your story. Either UFO sightings, ghost encounters, any kind of cryptids you've seen, or even if you heard it from a friend or a relative. Dates and times would be good, but if you don't know the time, you don't know the date, just an approximation. Let me know if I use your name or if there's a name you'd like me to use. You can send your stories to strangethings@arcanasa.com. That's ARCANASA.com. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.